Digitalization seems so easy. Everybody's doing it, so let's do it as well. So it has become doing more without really asking why we do certain things and without thinking how to do it better. In this year, we'd like to bring in the economic aspect, which would help us to look at the investments not on only the short term gains or ideas or something that the other country did, let's do as well, but in a long-term perspective of what kind of country we want to be, with what kind of digital transformation we want to have for that.
Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera. I'm a journalist, a sociologist, and researcher, today accompanied by senior expert Cristina Mand, to introduce to everybody in the audience, the future attendees, those who don't know they're going to come, but they will decide in the end to come, the e-Governance Conference 2025. The e-Governance Conference 2025, the flagship event basically of the year of e-Governance Academy, will take place this year between May 28th and 29th in Tallinn, as usual in a hybrid format, so physically in Estonia or online. And this time we're going to talk about raising prosperity through digital transformation. The title is From Bytes to Benefits. And Cristina, welcome back to the podcast to introduce yet again the e-Governance Conference.
Thank you very much and happy to be here.
I'm saying introduce yet again because, as in the past years, you have already taken care of coordinating the contents, the program, what people are going to hear about, basically, and they're going to discuss at the e-Governance Conference. You are doing it again this year. And I would say that we can definitely start with a general introduction on why we picked this topic. I will repeat it. So the title is From Bytes to Benefits, Raising Prosperity Through Digital Transformation. It means that this year, yet again, we have shifted the focus slightly. No? So we are centering on the economy. Digitalization is also a fundamental driver of economic growth, competitiveness, resilience. We've seen it in the past years with many contributions from all around the world. But this year, we're sort of asking a different question, which is how do we ensure that digitalization translates into real economic value? So, Cristina, let's start exactly from this. And as governments worldwide are basically investing, and I underline the word investing in digital transformation, how should we sort of like articulate, let's say, the economic value that digital transformation can have? And what should policymakers and stakeholders keep in mind when assessing the long-term impact of digitalization efforts?
Well, perhaps the best way to look at it then is to remember that digital transformation in a country is not something that should only bring very short-term benefits, but it really should have a long-term impact. So we have to balance those two things. And because while technology offers really vast potential, the real, I think, challenge lies in how we use digital transformation responsibly so that we can deliver outcomes that are meaningful, transparent, and measurable for people, for businesses, for societies, for the environment, and for the governments as well. So it's not about doing more. And I think that's what has happened in many countries because digitalization seems so easy. Everybody's doing it, so let's do it as well. So it has become doing more without really asking why we do certain things and without thinking how to do it better. And in this year, we'd like to bring in the economic aspect, which would help us to look at the investments not on only the short-term gains or ideas or something that the other country did, let's do as well, but in a long-term perspective of what kind of country we want to be, with what kind of digital transformation we want to have for that. So ask why before you ask what and how, and most of all then prioritize relevance and simplicity rather than scale and complexity, because it is going to cost us quite a lot.
And something that matters together with the why are we doing something, I would say that there is like a subdomain within the question of why are we doing something when it comes to governments assessing the long-term impact of digital transformation on the economy. And it is exactly answering that question on why we're doing something would also help you stay motivated through the process of digital transformation. Why? Because the relevance of the topic of exactly the impact of digitalization on the economy is the fact that it carries certain I wouldn't say difficulties, but maybe like complications in terms of how it is forecasted, how it is assessed, let's say, and how it is assessed not just beforehand, but also once it has happened. Why? Because basically this means that while instead I would say in the many years, let's say, that have passed in terms of digital transformation, we can identify even like different phases, let's say, of digital transformation and digital maturity of this transformation, let's say, in terms of the different journeys that have taken place. At the same time, the economic value is often framed through the lenses of efficiency gains or hours saved or I don't know, paper pages, let's say, saved. But instead here we're talking about something slightly different. We're talking about other dimensions, and a dimension that is more exactly oriented towards prosperity rather than savings. No, what can we say about these two words, let's say, within the context of the conference? Because I think that here lies quite an important distinction.
I think so too. And perhaps then let's look a little bit at putting together two things like digital maturity and investing in digital transformation, right? And one of the ways to look at it is that when we start, we start the journey. We start any journey with digitalizing what we do, and mainly for citizens, it means services, right? They don't see a lot of the secret things, that help the services to happen, but that would be their main value and gain. And quite often, those investments seem to be very much for improving something internally in a government institution or in an organization. That's sort of like, yes, we are ready to do something. But actually, the maturity develops, and one day the different organizations within a government need to interact with each other. There shouldn't be a database of citizens in a Ministry of Finance and a database of citizens in Ministry of Education, for example, right? There should be one which different organizations within the government can use. But then, if you want to provide integrated services to the citizens, you sort of move already to the third level of maturity, and you need to work outside the government agencies, right? You need to work with different stakeholders, whether they are businesses or whether they are civil society organizations or academia. But I would say that the more you move in your digital maturity level, you would really like those saving things to become a growth and innovation things. And you reach the fourth level, where I would say that it's about collaboration in developing the key sectors in your country. And what happens with investment is that if you only look at the investment sort of in the first level of maturity, how do we make it work within our organization? But you should look at the final aim, what it is that you would actually like to have, and it's this collaborative development, probably, across key sectors in your country. Then you should plan and invest accordingly. So ask the why, look at the final aim, then work backwards, take it into smaller steps. Start planning, start investing. You don't have to invest everything at the very upfront, but you have to have a plan upfront. And while you do that and while you implement that, also communicate what has happened on that long road to the final aim, and what is going on now, and what success stories this country is having, or is that particular stage is having. Yes, we have this one database now, but it's a database that helps us to communicate with, or helps us to share resources, and helps us to move to the next levels and next levels. So I think that is something that is really crucial for governments to keep in mind, or I would say any organization to keep in mind. If you build just something and invest in something only for yourself, then how is it going to benefit you if you actually need to interact with the others within your country, outside your government agencies, or in the countries in the region? And that's the secret, I think.
Following exactly on this line of thinking, I will introduce a couple of, I think, societal and economical, let's say, dynamics or motives that basically should push governments to look at an investment in digitalization also beyond the boundaries of their own organizations. That's how I would put it, let's say. The fact is that at the moment there are many, as for every e-governance conference, and as we basically have a representation of all the different countries and all the different people and all the different organizations that basically e-governance academy works with throughout the year, but also but also like thinkers, speakers, keynotes. But this was simply to say that there is a high level of representation of countries, and countries with different maturity, digital maturity, let's say, or like digital readiness, as we call it as well, at the e-governance conference. Globally, at the same time, this representation, let's say, of policymakers and stakeholders is facing very different challenges across the different geo-economic areas of the world. I will mention a few examples. One, yes, a digital investment in, for example, an African country, let's say, could be regarded in the first place as what are the efficiency gains within the boundaries of the organization itself. But at the same time, a long-term digital investment that actually gets out, let's say, of the organization and is effective in the economy and society must obviously keep into account the fact that the demographic rates are just going increasing, meaning that there will be more and more people to service and to provide services to, who will have also different needs based on the way that the economy will change according to the demographic trends and how they unfold. And this is one example about one area of the world. Let's make another example. Let's take, for example, the race to AI, let's say, the surge in artificial intelligence, the surge in models that have been in the past 2 years announced, released. And while, for example, until only very recently, we were thinking that most of the innovation was coming from the US space. Now, for example, recently with DeepSeek, we've seen also that there are other geo-economic actors, let's say, in the tech policy landscape of the world. What does this mean? That it's only something to look, let's say, to look at from the sideline like a horse race and support one or the other? No, because that poses a challenge in terms of competitiveness and economic competitiveness and competitiveness in terms of tech policy that other areas of the world, such as Europe, for example, definitely need to come to terms with and include as an element that is part of their industrial policies. This is simply to say that, yes, we talk about interoperability, as Christina, you have just mentioned. We talk about the efficiency gains and the effectiveness within organizations. But at the moment around the world, there are global challenges that digitalization inevitably will come to intersect depending on the investments and the plans that governments make. What do you think about this, Christina?
But haven't we always lived like that? We don't know what tomorrow brings, right? So I would say that the better you have thought about your theory of change, your plan, your why, the stronger you are. And yes, absolutely, it's clear that new things come up, new situations come up. The maturity levels are very different, and not many countries also have the necessary resource. And that's why I'm saying that the more you need to have your framework ready. And I think when we talk about sort of strategic thinking and plans, we don't necessarily mean that it has to be a written document. Well, it has to be written, because if it's not written, it doesn't exist. But it doesn't have to be a document where you can't change anything. But it should be a roadmap of how you would like to move to that final aim where you want to have, whether it's about services, whether it's about actually the quality of life for your citizens, or your relationships with your neighbors, or the health of the economy in your country, or the questions of security in your country, or the questions of education in your country, or gender balance and so on. You should have that why in place, and then work backwards, and then adapt according to the changing needs, right? But I would also say that no matter where you are in your level of maturity, we are struggling also with the same with some of the same challenges, because when you digitalize absolutely everything, or you digitalize and you don't think about the economic impact of what you do, you don't think about the return on investment, then you might end up in a situation where you just can't afford that digital world that you have created. Where do you keep your data? If you only have 5 people who need a particular service, do you really need to digitalize that? And the third aspect is the governments shouldn't do, and they mustn't do things all themselves. Their role is to create favorable conditions for businesses and organizations to come along and play their part and prosper and innovate their sectors they work and the digital solutions that they use to do their work. The government's role is to keep the framework, to give the framework and regulate, right?
And definitely that framework is not supposed to be exactly like Moses and the tables of the law, let's say.
I
It would
hope
be,
not, yeah.
it would be a bit against what we are professing as well, in terms of
I would
being
say
resilient,
so.
let's
I
say,
would
in
say so. But I would
digitalization.
also say that what it makes really is the need for a government here is to be a smart orderer of things. Not to say that, oh, build me a platform, but we need to solve a problem for our citizens, or for this particular region, or for this particular service, and discuss it with the civil society organizations and with the businesses, and probably also with the academia, how to best solve it. Your government doesn't need to say, oh, give me a drill to drill a hole in the wall. What they should say is, we need to hang pictures, because pictures make your life more colorful. So let's think together, what's the best option to hang the pictures, like the one behind me, but I think that's what the governments quite often do not think.
And to stay within the metaphor, unlike Moses, you are not leading alone. So here I will actually reconnect exactly, Christina, to the point that you were introducing, because I would say that for what are going to be the domains, let's say, the focus points of the e-governance conference 2025, we have already explored a couple which I would label, let's say, as awareness and maturity/readiness, let's
Right.
say. You have said, you have just mentioned that obviously governments do not need to do it alone. There are 2 other actors, obviously, that to bring about widespread, distributed dividends, let's say, from digital transformation, obviously need to be involved in the picture. Otherwise, we will not be talking about digitalization of the economy and society. The 2 actors that I'm thinking of, one is definitely people. But first, I would like to focus instead on the private sector. So businesses. You mentioned businesses and creating an environment and an economy that can prosper. So what is the role of businesses, let's say, within this context, within this framework? And at the same time, how do governments find allies, let's say, in the private sector in order to realize the projects that they have planned?
Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about it at the conference, but there are 2 things that I'd like to maybe bring out here. One is the understanding of the value of engagement, that you, as a government, you already have a culture of talking to different stakeholders, right? Businesses, but also civil society, academia, and so on, in order to find out more where the problems are, and in order to involve potential problem solvers in the discussion from the very beginning. Okay, so often I hear that, oh, with digital it's so much easier, we can now have digital engagement. If you don't have the culture of engagement, there is no trust between the government and the the private sector, or if the private sector doesn't feel that they are valued, or they don't see the value in giving input, or they are not engaged in designing things together, talking about it together, then I would say that you don't solve it with digitalizing engagement. If it's not a good process, then it doesn't work. So I would say that every government, at least nowadays, should look at how the engagement in that particular country works, and also maybe step down from those really high positions and say, we know everything what's good for the country. Let's say that the good for the country is a joint discussion and can be implemented by whoever is in power at that particular time. In democracy, they also change, right? So it's the process that matters over who has the right to do what. And I think so. I would say that what we spoke about last year in talking about success is that you should have the people, the process, and the technology seen together, that because that's the enabler of modern prosperous societies. It can also bring challenges, and then you can look at the challenges as well. But the second aspect next to engagement, to me, is the public-private partnership, and taking that really, really seriously. From planning from mapping problems to planning to designing to implementing, delivering, and so on. Again, I'll come back to something I said before. The governments mustn't do everything themselves in a country. It's dangerous because governments change. It's much better to do it with businesses because it's their, how would I say it? They are more hungry to innovate, to do things differently, to prosper, and as such also to probably provide much better services. And I think that's one of the success things in Estonia as well. But the government has to be a smart orderer of things, not to say, oh, do whatever you like, but actually to say what it is that we are trying to achieve here. And again, we come back to the very beginning of the conversation. It's the final aim, the why, that really should be the beginning of the discussion, not what and how.
Another point of view to take from the government's perspective, let's say, in when we address public-private partnerships, is the fact that governments probably should not even just, let's say, order something from the public sector in terms of like an investment that they want to make and returns that they want to get from them. Because there's also like another perspective, which is the fact that tech at that point and like tech policy and digital investments also become a matter of economic policy.
Exactly.
Meaning the framework that governments in a given country give to how relationships with the private sector are established, how the private sector is supported, what type of funding goes into the private sector, not only what money is used to carry out a development project, but also what are the second level, let's say, second order type of consequences of bringing about this project. And maybe you were not even considering in the first place. This all pertains to policy dimensions that are both economic and social. And it is also on governments to define. We can already see that because, for example, I would say that looking at it in this way and looking at government's investments in digitalization for the economy in this way also would allow us to place governments on different points of a spectrum, let's say, of their degree of openness or closure, of support or keeping things to themselves. And that also determines, in my opinion, how, for example, in terms of competitiveness and general economic trends globally, countries are going to differentiate each other.
Absolutely. And one, I think, to follow on that line of thought is particularly important not to see digital transformation or digital strategy as a silo thing in a country, because it's more about, education policy, economic policy, health policy, social policy, and so on. And digital policy is something that's horizontal. It's that goes through all those different policies. And if there is very little engagement or very little respect for public-private partnership, or very little respect or interest in engaging businesses or civil society organizations as stakeholders or developing public-private partnership in education policy, social policy, health policy, then if you only want to do it in digital policy, it doesn't really work. So it's something that I would say should become a cultural norm in a country and its policymaking. And I do understand that countries have different traditions, countries have different cultures. We also see that. But if a country really wants to become prosperous and wants its citizens to be prosperous and contributing, I would say that that's how it should work, right? But let me come back to something we talked about before a little bit as well, is that I think the governments and then together with the stakeholders, the real, like, a question about the return on investment is really difficult, and it's not easy to measure. We have asked around from many economists in preparing for the conference, is there a good model? Is there a good way? Is there something that you can say, teach? And the answer is not really, right? It goes from case to case, but there are five nominators that will tell you what digital transformation should do or could do when it becomes to measuring the return on investment. One is that it should have workforce productivity, that people, a lot of the economic benefits and prosperity come from the fact that we can do more with less, right? So it's a workforce productivity. Second is the other side, the customer experience. Am I a happier citizen? Am I a happier client when I'm using a digitalized public service, right? If I'm not, then your return on your investment in, digitalizing a service is not really good idea, So, and that can be designed and researched before you make really expensive decisions. Then it's the digital adoption. How often and how well are digital solutions being used? If you develop something, I hear so many times from countries, yes, I know we have this platform, but nobody uses it. Well, maybe think before you create the platform, ask. Maybe that's not a problem for people, so that's the third one. The fourth one would be the time, meaning the speed to react to the market. If you have very solid plans, very fixed plans, and do not want to go a little bit, with the flow, you create something in the future that actually happened already yesterday. And I would say that AI is a little bit like that. And that's why governments need to work with the business sector and the private sector and the civil society organizations, because they are much faster with things. Right? So I don't want to say that you need to do things very fast, but you have to know what's happening. And if something you come up with 5 years later when people are not using it anymore because they are far more advanced, then that's a problem. And the fifth component is the organizational culture. It's the change question. Can you manage that change within your organization, with other organizations in the country, in a general governance way or governance methods in your country? Do we have necessary skills for that? And I don't mean only digital skills, but I mean leadership skills, coordinating skills, feedback skills. And do we have an attitude? Do we want to be a country and government praised by its awareness, flexibility, transparency, knowledge, and creating trust? Or not? And I think these are the 5 key things that we should ask when we want to know if that investment is good or not for our society.
Thank you, Christina, for this for the short list. Because I will add to this the fact that even if it sounds maybe to some of our listeners like, oh wow, there is a lot to do, or like, oh my God, we've got so far with in terms of like digital readiness, and now there is also like yet all of this work, let's say, to do. I would say that people should not be worrying about this as something unknown or that they have not done before, because there are so many governments that already have created, for example, their own national digital agencies, or are coordinating, let's say, projects of digital transformation exactly with this transversal cross-cutting in terms of domain and fields approach. And this is definitely something that connects also a little bit with the last of the points that you were mentioning in the short list, which it basically gives you the impression and the idea that digitalization, as well as the economy and society, should be taken as a system, let's say, as a system that means that whenever you carry out digitalization projects, the consequences could be also beyond, let's say, the scope, the specific scope of the goals that you have set out. Maybe they have other spillover effects, let's say, on other sectors of the society and allow those to grow as well. But it means also that it's a system because it involves different actors. It involves the governments, as we said, it involves the businesses, and it involves the leadership and the vision that governments and business put into it. But as you have mentioned, it involves also the people, the skills that they have, and if we want to reconnect it, let's say, to an economic indicator that you have mentioned, you said productivity. So basically, digitalization, the purpose of a digitalization project in that sense should be exactly of increasing the output while diminishing the effort, let's say, ideally, in the most ideal scenario. So focusing on people before we wrap up this episode and give a general call, let's say, to for everyone to join at the e-governance conference 2025. Let's focus for a moment on people. So if this shows that digital transformation in itself is a system as much as the economy and society themselves, there are many factors, let's say, that come together at varying societal levels to bring about this prosperity that we're talking. So in terms of digital skills and readiness of the workforce, why does that matter and what the focus could be?
When we talk about skills, I think that one of the major things to keep in mind is that we don't need necessarily only digital skills when we talk about digital transformation, right? Yes, it always helps when you are computer literate or you know how to navigate Google. And what is really important is that you know how to protect yourself against cyber threats and so on. But you should be ready and skilled to read, to understand which news are real and which are fake, where there is deception. I mean, maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could have a bad guy coming behind your door and trying to pretend somebody else and trying to steal things from you. The same things can happen now online. It just has moved to online, but it's not necessarily a digital skill. It's a survival skill. But I would say that what the digital transformation requires from us skill-wise, it requires those skills that are valuable in today's, I don't know, when you work as a medic or when you work as a teacher or when you work as a journalist. It's about people skills. It's about the skills to adapt. It's about the skills to collaborate. It's about the skills to be empathetic. It's about the skills to learn, to continuously learn and manage and handle the change that's around us. That is definitely something that we haven't had before, at least not at that speed. So I think that's really what it is all about. But and we don't have to become all of us specialists in digital skills, but we have to understand how we use our data and give our data, how we use services, but also give input to develop far better services for us as citizens. How we work with AI, we can't really regulate AI, we can only regulate our own behavior, right? So what kind of ethical behavior AI requires from us as people? Because we make AI, right? AI does what we tell it to do. Or it's about interoperability, how different things are connected and talk to each other. Or it's about the engagement that we talked about at the very beginning. And I think that the conference will give a really good way to come, meet, network, talk, learn, and share through 2 days of keynotes, panels, really cool showcases from around the world, and workshops about then how to succeed in digital transformation, keeping in mind the economic aspect of how to make it beneficial for us as societies.
Christina, thanks a lot because you sort of like anticipated the question that I was going to ask you, but I still have something for you to say actually regarding the e-governance conference 2025. I will do a little recap, but then there is like something interesting. I feel that marks also like a slight change that could be interesting for all the participants who are going to attend the conference. First of all, what I would say is simply that at 2025.egovconference.ee, you can find, as usual, and as for every year, all the information about the upcoming conference. As I said, it will take place on the 28th and 29th of May 2025 in Tallinn, but also in online format, and it's called From Bytes to Benefits, Raising Prosperity Through Digital Transformation. The domains will be many. We're going to talk about as we said, the impact of digitalization on the economy, which will be a little bit our transversal approach, let's say, to the different domains. But then obviously we're going to talk about cybersecurity. We're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about data and services, about infrastructure and interoperability that we have mentioned today. But Christina, what is the kind of... So if you were to put yourself for a moment in the mind and the mindset of an attendee, let's
I'm
say,
the persona,
just,
you mean, right?
yes, you're the person and the persona, let's say. So not the program coordinator, even though obviously with the knowledge of a program coordinator, but at the same time, you are a participant. What is the kind of experience, what is the kind of journey, let's say, that this year awaits at the e-governance conference 2025?
I think more than ever before, we really try to see and take our participants on the journey, as you just called it, to really understand that it doesn't begin with a digital transformation. It begins with a look at the strategic look at what it is that you want to have in your country or in your organization at the end of the long process, and how to make necessary investments for that. We would also like, on top of governance, to then look at the economic aspects of digital transformation that we just talked about. But those have impact on governance. So the journey continues on what requirements or innovations or adaptations this strategic approach through economy has on governance. We'd like people to learn from Estonia, and Estonia to learn from other participants and to learn from each other. Hence, like I said, we have great keynotes, we have great panels, we have great showcases, more than ever we have had before. And at the end of the 29th of May, we'd like the participants to leave with more skills, more knowledge, satisfied with the experience they had, and will to act for prosperity.
Christina, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you. And welcome to Tallinn.
Welcome to Tallinn, exactly, to everybody who's going to attend the e-governance conference 2025 in person. One last memo. At 2025.egovconference.ee, you will find all information and also the concept note to get a general introduction at the moment into the workings of the e-governance conference, but that we're also going to update so that you will get more information about the journey that Christina just described, but then also further on about the speakers, the topics, the domains, the approach. So stay tuned also there, even if you maybe already have the ticket or you already know that you're going to get it at some point, because there will be more interesting content coming up your way over there. That's a lot also from me, your host for today and also the other days, mostly. Thanks a lot to everybody for tuning in for this other episode of the Digital Government Podcast introducing the conference, and have a good one.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.